Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Once again, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at Galactic Comics and Collectibles on Hammond Street in Bangor, Maine. But you can also visit them at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com and find them over on social media as well. This episode features a return of New York Times bestselling author Jay Bonansinga to the podcast. In the past, we've talked about his 8 Walking Dead novels that he co-wrote the first 4 with Robert Kirkman and the last 4 he did by himself. But we're here this time to talk about his older book from 1997 called The Killer's Game, which is getting a re-release in trade paperback, as well as a new audiobook release that's a movie tie-in cover for his adaptation that's hitting the screens here in September, The Killer's Game, which is starring Dave Bautista as the main character. So we talked about that and a bunch of other things right here on this podcast episode. Jay Bonansinga, a New York Times bestselling author. But before you listen, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, all that stuff, as well as rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff over on Apple and Spotify and everywhere you get your podcasts, as well as for much more stuff, check out capesandtights.com. But this is Jay Bonansinga returning to the podcast to talk about The Killer's Game and its adaptation coming to screens near you. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, Jay. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. Excited. I talk all the time about the Walking Dead novels with people because they obviously go to my local comic book shop all the time. And I've talked to them too about the idea of carrying novels that based around comic book worlds. So like it's really easy for him to get a lot of the Marvel books nowadays because those are all published by Penguin Random House, and Penguin Random House he can order from because that's also a comic book distributor now.
Yeah.
And as some of the other ones are harder to get. Some of the ones I just read, I just finished Alex Segura's book, Alter Ego. His book is coming out in December as a follow up to his other book, Secret Identity, which deals with the comic book industry as a mystery novel. But I was like, it's harder for him to get those novels because he doesn't have like a distributor to work with on that sense. But I was like, I think it'd be great. I don't think he'd sell a ton, but if you just carried like one copy of each of the books, and then when you sell one, you replenish it, it would be great.
Yeah, I think we live now in a world of hybrid media. Everything crosses over, and it's going to just get more and more blurred. Like the new Reeves Melville book, prose and comics are melding, and in fact, I've noticed in the film business a lot more. It's almost like we've gone back to the 70s because a lot more films are based on books.
And the opposite now. I mean, Jay, they just didn't they just announce the Maxine X, the Mia Goth series is now being adapted into a novelization of the movies. And it's like, I've always said to people that I love watching movies, and movies and TV and all that stuff is a big part of my life, but I can't do that only. Like I have to be able, like I was just mentioning before we started recording, I was listening to the original Killer's Game audiobook while I was reading the novel, and I did that on the way to my camp. I can't watch the movie on the way to camp very safely unless I had some sort of self-driving car or I had my wife drive and I was sitting in the passenger seat. So having a other way of taking in some media is well worth it. Laying in bed at night, I can read a book, whereas watching a TV is a little bit more.
I still to this day, I've written 35 books. I still to this day, think to myself as I'm working on a book, I'm working on a sequence, and I'm like, here's where we cut to a montage. And I've always wondered, what is a literary montage? What is that? What does it read like? I know what it looks like. I know, in The Godfather, one of the greatest montages is when they go to war. And then there's this amazing montage that Coppola created, of the guys going to the mattresses, and I always think of that. And so I've experimented over the years with what is a montage in prose. I've tried summaries, I've tried, ellipses, all these different. But when Kirkman first hired me, he goes, just just write 50 pages. Just show me what you got. Just, I'm not gonna like direct you. Just, the story. He gave me like an 8-page outline. And I just thought comics are closer to film, for me. They're in the here and now. They're constant forward
Hmm.
movement, So I thought I'm gonna put it in present tense.
Hmm.
Um, and not exactly emulate a comic, but kind of deep down in the granular part of it. Nobody ever commented on whether it was a good idea or not to do president. The minute everybody's read it was like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
cool. This is working. So I love that. I love that stuff. I got a master's in film. I'm kind of a film brat myself,
Yeah.
and so I don't make any distinction,
Hmm.
between the two mediums and comics. That's what I tell my students. I teach creative writing at DePaul University, and I'm like, there's no difference. I teach screenwriting and novel writing
Yeah.
for the same department, you know. Um,
It's
then,
you mentioned it's a blend nowadays. There really is that blend
yeah,
of things.
right.
And I believe truly that, especially with when, like, say, we're going to talk about the Killers game here, you didn't go into writing the Killers game going, I've got to write this so it looks good on TV. Like, you wrote it or on screen, you wrote it as a novel. You wanted to write this
Yeah,
book for what the medium you were writing
yeah,
for.
well
If
said.
someone purchases the rights to it, great, awesome, we'll work on
Yeah,
that afterwards. You're not sitting there going, it's like when you see a movie that's filmed with the idea that it's going to be in 3D and it's obvious. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you're looking at like the swords
great
coming at the
point.
screen, being like, that was filmed for this
Great
being in
point.
3D. Like, you didn't
Yeah,
do that on purpose. And I love that. The same thing with comic books nowadays. Like, it's great. It's the next step in the evolution of your creativeness to have it be adapted, or at least being
yeah,
in the news that it's going to be adapted.
right,
And
right,
but don't sit there and write the thing to get adapted, because then it just
right.
becomes a whole other thing.
Yeah,
And I don't believe that that's what you've been doing, which is great, but you've been
right.
doing a good job
Yeah.
there.
Some books are camera ready, but
Yes.
it's not because they were written that way.
Yes.
Like I still tell people, if you want to read a book that's camera ready, and the author had no intention of it being made into a movie, but it's camera ready, is Silence of the Lambs.
Yep.
It's just perfectly structured, perfectly written, and it's such a great read. But it is camera ready. If Ted Talley, the guy who wrote the screenplay,
Eh,
he won the Academy Award. And I don't take anything away from him, but the book was like
It's
butter.
yes. You can almost follow along with the book and the movie at the same time, which doesn't
Exactly.
always happen that way, because they need to change things and so on. Yeah, you're right. It's actually a good point. Like, I could just see hybrid reading. Imagine hybrid watching the movie and the book at the same time. Be like, okay, I'm gonna watch
I'm
this
sure,
scene.
I'm
I
sure
can skip
somebody,
that chapter. Yeah.
I'm
but
sure
but
some nerd somewhere has done that.
but
And
I've
my
I've
hat's off to them.
I've always, like, like when you go to a bookstore or any sort of place where people congregate and are passionate about something. So for me, a lot of times it's the comic book store, and
Yeah,
I argue certain things. And the one thing I argue recently is why there hasn't been more Walking Dead, not issue 193 and 194 and so on and so forth. But why isn't there? I mean, Todd McFarlane just did this whole Spawn universe thing. So he had
yeah,
Spawn obviously for years, and now there's like King Spawn, and there's Sam and Twitch, and there's all these different things that relate back to the original series. And I'm like, that's like I feel like Kirkman doesn't need any more money. Let's be honest; he's probably
right.
set for
I
life.
was
But
just
it feels
thinking
like it's
that. You read my
easily
mind.
printing money there by just doing a story. And there's what we have 8 books, 9 books. Is it
Yeah, eight. Yeah,
eight
very good.
books of information that you could pull
Yeah,
from too? It's not even like you need to come up with new stories. Like, it's all right there. You could just put it in
yeah,
comic book format and put it out there, and it'd be another whole way for people to
yeah.
find your novels in a different way. And so I argue that all the time, and people are like, "Yeah, I don't think it's on Robert's mind to do that." Like, and he wouldn't even have to write it. You could have big names in
Right,
the comic book world adapt it if you wanted to. You could
right,
get some of these
right,
bigger names and be like, I'll do a series, a 5-issue series or whatever. And I
right.
was like,
Oh,
yeah,
right.
I'm just being selfish because I like your book so much, and I like the Walking Dead comic book so much, that I'm like, I just want more of it. So, like, it's just me being selfish at that point.
Yeah, Robert, he is on many levels, he's a great artist because
Mhm.
he's constantly thinking about the next thing he wants to do. He's not like looking backward. I agree with everything you just said,
Yeah.
and he probably goes, "All right, it's an asset.
Yeah.
It's in the bank. It's an asset I have. I can do anything I want to with them." And God bless him, but he for a while he was experimenting like with his mini little, backstory for Negan.
Yeah.
Um, and he was, packaging things like that. But he's like you just said, he's constantly thinking about the next thing, and he has, so much, gravitas that he
Mhm.
doesn't need to worry about not doing something. you know, he could not do something for the rest of his life and be very well.
Yeah, I listen to like Kevin Smith's podcast a lot, the Fat Man Beyond podcast, and he always mentions the thing where it was like he makes the exaggeration joke about Kirkman has more money than God and all this other stuff, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, he's not worried about finances at this point. I don't think it's a with his Invincible work and with the Walking Dead and the Walking Dead TV show and all that stuff he's got his hands full. But as a comic book lover, it's one of those things that I just like go back to the medium that made you where you are now, and that would be the Walking Dead. But also, the Walking Dead in my mind is somewhat perfect. So like as it sits, like there isn't too much. There's your novels. There's the Walking Dead 193 issues. There's
Yeah,
the Typhoon novel.
right,
And there's a couple other. There's like Alien, which is the book that Brian K. Vaughan did, which is a
right.
one
Wow.
shot. Those are the only that like that's it. Don't water it down either, too. Also, like if you want to read Walking Dead stuff, though, you've got
Yeah,
stuff to read. If you want to watch the show, you got it. So I can see both sides of it. But I've always like if I want to be selfish in buying, because I'm buying all the deluxe Walking Dead comics now, the ones that are in color, because he's like wrote me. I just need to get more money to Robert Kirkman. No, so I would say I would buy it. So if you give me this, Rise of the Governor in a comic book format, I would
yeah.
100% be on board getting it. But
Right, right,
again,
right.
I don't know if it's necessary either, though. That's the thing. So like I've got my book I can go back to and read and so on. But that's my I wanted to get that off my chest a little bit here at the beginning.
No, I agree
Uh
with you. That's a really good point. Yeah,
that
yeah.
I argue it on a regular basis. And people are like, you need to shut up, Justin. Like, okay, we understand you want more Walking Dead comic books. Please stop. Like, we understand. But 14 years prior, is
Yeah,
it 1997 when you released the Killer's Game for the first
yeah.
time? Or is that, am I
Very
right about
good.
that?
Very,
And I'm
very good.
guessing you were writing it years prior to
I
that too.
wrote
Like,
it in 94.
okay.
Actually, I wrote the pitch in
Mhm.
94 and sold it on the pitch because it had this engine in it. I always joke with my wife, you know, that was my cash cow. That was my golden goose. This whole idea that there's a hitman, he's got a code he lives by. He's a killing machine, but he's well put together.
Mhm.
He's other than killing people, he's a decent human being. And at the beginning of the story, he learns that he has a terminal illness. So, as they do, he's a hitman. He puts a hit
Mhm.
on himself. Everybody like sits forward when I say that.
Yes.
And then I say, and the twist is, he puts this global hit on himself as a game just to see who it will be who can kill him. And, you know, 15 minutes before the game is set to start, he gets a note from the lab that they got the wrong blood test. And his doctor's like, so that's all I had in 1994. I just wrote that pitch. I pitched it to my agent at the time. He's like, wow, yeah, there's something here. And he goes, I think I could even just take this because I made like a little 25-page pitch,
Yeah.
introduced the character and made the pitch. And he's like, yeah, I might even be able to sell this. Don't do anything yet. Let's see if I can sell this. And he did. He had an auction and he had like two publishers that wanted it. And then he got this amazing dude, Andrew Lazar. I think it's his great uncle who was a legendary agent, Swifty Lazar. And most people in the film business go, "Oh God, yeah, I remember that guy." I think he was like Sinatra's agent or something. And but Andrew is this super cool, super bright, producer. I mean, he basically discovered the Wachowski brothers, and he's really good. So he bought the rights to it in '95. So it'll be 30 years. In a few months, it'll be 30 years from the time he bought the rights. He was 27 years old. He was 27 years old. He's 57 now. That's how long it took him to get the movie made. And
I'm trying to think of like 30 years. I'm trying to think of like your main star in the movie was 25. You know what I mean? Like Dave Bautista was only 25 years old when this rights were
right,
sold, and wasn't even probably doing much in the acting world or
right,
something like that. Like
right.
obviously he was wrestling at the time. He
Yeah,
wasn't even thinking. If someone would have said to you 30 years ago that this professional wrestler was going to be the main
I
star of the
know.
movie, you'd been like, "What are you talking
Great.
about?"
That's a great
But
point.
I'm
I
sure there's
mean,
people in the movie that weren't even born yet. I'm
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
right,
it's like,
right.
there's people in the movie that were probably under the age of 10 or so on and so forth when the
Yeah,
book came out. And so
right.
that's actually kind of funny. And it's funny. We've talked to many people. So we've had Daniel Kraus on with Whalefall being purchased, the rights being purchased and so on. And actually Daniel's on an episode around this too, because we're talking about his new book, Pay the Piper.
Cool.
But
Cool.
we've talked to, Adam Caesar was on a couple weeks ago, which is talking about his Clown in the Cornfield book that's also being adapted. And
Right.
but a lot of times we talk to people about, oh, cool, it's the rights have been purchased. This is awesome. One day you'll get a film. And this is now getting to a point where we're able to talk to someone who's like, no, your movie's like it's being prepared to be put into the theaters right now.
Yeah.
The reels are being sent to people and getting this is actually happening. It's actually coming to fruition for you.
Yeah.
However, it has taken you 30 years to get this done.
You know what?
So
I'll give you a little sort of dirty little secret. It's good if that happens to an author, a book
yeah,
author. It's
yeah,
good. You should hope for 30 years of development because they have to keep optioning it.
yes, yes,
It's like passive income. I would
yes.
like for years, I would have, I would forget about it. I wouldn't even remember it, and I'd get this call from the agent at CAA who had represented it in the film world. And he's like, Jay, I got good news. I got a check sitting on my desk for you.
Because someone else is
I
wanting now.
can't do
Yeah.
anything, it's I mean, yeah, it's really exciting and fun and cool to see. Even if you hate the film, my feeling is if you even if you can't stand the film, it's still exciting to know
Yes.
that your work, your story is going to be on 2,000 screens across the country, and it's got these great actors in it, and you know all this money has been spent on it. It's a super big compliment to an author. I mean, James Cain, the guy that wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice,
Yes.
he once said, when asked, well, how do you feel about all your books being made into crappy movies and just ruining your books? And he goes, actually, where I'm sitting right now, I can see my books. They're on a shelf
Mhm.
right across the room, and they look fine to me. Nothing has happened to them.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know,
Nothing's
you
changed
can
them. Nothing
you
can
can
go
still
back there and
find
change
them
those.
at
No.
all finer bookstores. Just
Yes.
yeah. And I kind of feel that way. You had your say, let somebody else. It's a huge compliment. Somebody else wants to do another version of it. They
And
set
with
My book is set in Chicago, and they put the screenplay is pretty loyal, faithful to the book, but they set it in Europe. That was the big change. Is they said it's all the great European assassins.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Well, let's say it's also things have changed. If you think about how different the world is 30 years after you wrote the book. So there's some
yeah,
things that probably need to
exactly.
change just solely on that fact. The fact that what you were living at the time, what you were going through your brain, what you were living, going places and doing things are
Right,
different 30 years later. So having
right,
this
right.
book be adapted you know, if it was adapted and someone bought it in 97, 95, and by 2000 the movie came out, it might have been way different than what it is now. And so it's almost nice to have that ability to have 30 years to percolate and do all
Yeah.
that stuff. And I'm
And
looking at, if you look at the Wikipedia page, which is obviously not always 100% accurate, but the number of actual stars that have also been attached to this movie, not only have you been able to get checks over and over and over again for people purchasing it, but like you at one point, like Wesley Snipes was attached, like Michael Keaton was attached at times, like the number of
right.
names that like ended up happening, and in the ending, having Dave Bautista be
Yeah.
your star is not a horrible thing. I mean, he's got some pretty
It's
good as a comic
amazing.
book fans,
I
we have a
remember
big
years,
love for him.
yeah, years ago when I saw him, I think maybe it was the first time I'm not a huge pro wrestling
Mm,
fan, although my best friend, everybody I work with in the business, they're all like huge. In fact, all the horror authors, I could name, a roll call of the great horror authors that love pro wrestling. I don't
hmm
know, I don't know, there's some kind of continuity here that I never really understood. But I remember seeing him in Blade Runner, and I was like, this guy can act. He's huge, and but he can act. He
hmm
can play anything.
hmm
And also that's how him playing Joe Flood in the Killer's Game came about, because he had a meeting with Andrew, and he goes, I don't know why nobody is interested in having this is kind of funny, but I don't know why there's nobody out there that's interested in putting me in a rom-com.
Yes.
I want to be a star in a rom-com.
Yeah.
And so Andrew's like, well, I've got an action film that's an action rom-com.
Yeah.
And that's how he came aboard.
It's absolutely perfect, and honestly it's one of those things. It's almost, honestly, I like the idea of I do read a lot of books that have been adapted or are adaptation. I try to go back and forth. So like a lot of the Stephen King books, I'm always like, sometimes I read the book first and then watch the movie.
Yeah,
Sometimes I watch the movie
me
first and then
too.
read the book,
I
and so on and
agree.
so forth. And it was funny though, it's like I knew that it was being made into a film for the Killer's Game. I read the book and I was like, halfway through the book is when I actually looked at the casting, looked at who's starring in the film and so on and so forth. And I was like, that actually fits to me. I feel like, I don't know, it's something about Joe's rough industry that he's in, but also
Yeah,
cuddly. Cause like, I don't know, Dave Bautista has this weird ability that I feel like he would cuddle really well
yeah,
at the same
yeah,
time
yeah.
as also shoot people in the head.
He has chemistry with Sophia,
Yeah.
on screen that you'll be blown away by. Like he has chemistry. You can't really learn that. It's
Mhm.
just it's got to be there. He's got in real life he loves dogs, and he
Mhm.
takes shelter dogs and he trains them and he loves them and he travels with them. It's I mean, I met so many, I became friends actually
Yeah.
with a lot of villains when I worked at The Walking Dead. Guys that were just always playing these scary, characters. And they're, to a person, they're the sweetest, warmest, nicest people you'll ever meet. It's amazing.
It-
Giancarlo Esposito,
yeah.
just friendly, down to earth, just he's got his shit together. David Morrissey,
Yeah.
fun, funny. He loves rock and roll. He's got a radio show in England. These people are super cool.
And that's why I love conventions, because a convention gives the ability for you to actually meet these people, or now with social media and live videos and podcasting and interviews and TV shows.
Yeah,
Because
right,
before we saw these people as that's who the people are in real life, and people
right,
expect that when they meet them, like, oh, Dave Bautista is
right,
probably going to crush me in my head when I see him. And he's like, no, he's probably going to put his arm around you and say, how's it going, and so on and
right,
so forth. It's just this
exactly,
experience we get ahead. I mean, how many people think that Negan is Negan? Like that's the Negan that you think that like he actually bashes people in for it with his head,
right,
or the bat. That's not. I mean, Jeffrey Dean Morgan is a lovable dude as well. So like, there's that side of things that you
exactly,
don't see. And yeah,
exactly.
and sometimes, and you get cast into a certain role. Like obviously the benefit Dave Bautista has over some other people is that when he was in his Guardians of the Galaxy movies, he had makeup on and special effects. So like he didn't look just like himself,
Right,
being Drax, which gives him the
right.
ability to be other characters. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure Daniel Radcliffe it can never really ever be in a movie ever again with not being, oh, that's Harry Potter in a movie. Like
Yeah, there's
even
one.
watching his Weird Al was like, oh, that's Harry Potter dressed up like Weird Al. It's a really
Right.
weird version of that character. And
That's
so
so
he's a
true. That's so true. That's so true.
it's like, oh, Harry Potter. What is he actor? He's an actor now. Harry Potter grew up and has left his magic behind, and now he's going to start acting as Weird Al. But Dave
Sometimes
Bautista had to make it. Same thing with Palm in this
yeah,
she's in this film as well, and having
right,
Mantis behind her, and that's all makeup and special effects and things like
right.
that. That person can move on to be a different
Yeah,
person. So that's a benefit to them, but
his
also
one,
brings in people who are comic book fans to watch this movie because we're like, oh, two characters that were in
yeah.
it. And Ben Kingsley was also in a Marvel movie, so there's
Right,
that too.
right, right. Yeah, the ultimate superhero role for a big time actor to play would be Deadpool. You,
Yeah,
you can't see him,
yeah.
so he doesn't even have to show up.
You, I will say you see a lot more of his face in this new movie. I watched it
Yeah,
the
I
other
haven't
night.
seen it. That's
I
what
was
I've heard that.
it's you
Yeah,
see a lot more of it, and they actually make a joke in it. Is a nice Deadpool, and they make a joke about how where's your mask, and the nice Deadpool's like, have you seen this face? Like, why would I want to wear a mask over this face? Like,
right.
come on, people, like, come on. And it's actually kind of funny. I read an article this morning that it's been 34 years since a husband and wife duo were the top two movies at the box office in the weekend. So like Deadpool obviously has Ryan Reynolds in it, and then
Wow.
Colleen Hoover's movie, It Ends With Us,
Yeah.
stars Blake Lively, and they were the top two movies in the theater this weekend. And the
Wow,
last time
that's
it happened,
interesting.
I forgot who
Yeah,
it
I
was
was going
now,
to
but
ask you that.
yeah, I forgot
When
who it
was the
was
last
now,
time
but
it happened?
it was 34 years ago, and I had told my wife, I'm like, that could never have happened, but no, it definitely happened because obviously actors and actresses a lot of times end up getting married.
Yeah, right.
It might have been Demi Moore, and was it Bruce Willis? Is that were they married at one point?
Yes,
It might have
yes.
been that. I'm trying to think of now who it was. I was just so focused on the fact that it was Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. But yeah,
Right, right,
there was 34 years ago. The top two movies were husband and wife were starring in the movies. But yeah,
right,
it's pretty
right, right.
crazy. It's pretty crazy to
I,
have
I,
that.
I have these, I've had dreams over the last 30 years of different versions of the film. And I would dream that because John Woo was signed on to be the director at one point. And so I have had dreams where Bruce Willis was Joe Flood and John Woo was directing it. And I my dream was really vivid and like and I one of my favorite films of all time is The Killer.
Yeah.
It Chow Yun Fat, the mise en scène is just it's ridiculous. It's so great. And so
Mhm.
I would have dreams where Bruce Willis was in a film like that, directed by John Woo, and it was my story.
Well, yeah. By the way, it was Bruce Willis and Demi Moore was Die Hard 2 and Ghost. That was the
Oh
one
wow.
back in the day. So
Yeah.
it's 34 years ago. Right around the same time that your Killers game movie
Right.
was
Exactly.
right from the beginning of that. But no. So
Thank God
obviously
we're both still alive. I mean,
this is it's a book that is I absolutely loved it. And I was mentioning before we started recording too that I listened to the audiobook and read it, and it was narrated by you mentioned it earlier.
Robert Forster.
Yes,
Yeah, Robert.
which is hard for again talking about people in other roles. All I could picture was him playing his character in Heroes, the TV show on NBC
Oh,
years
yeah,
ago.
right.
So in my mind, I was just thinking, I was picturing that character reading the book.
Yeah,
But no, it was wonderfully narrated there. But the benefit of also this adaptation and in this movie coming out is that you're also getting re-releasing of your stuff. So like that's a big thing. And so that's a huge thing. I've always wanted to wonder to people who write a lot of books who get adapted into films, like say Stephen King, for an example, or something like that,
right, right.
that seeing the movie cover, it's like I always like the original cover. So like I'm always gonna love the Killer's Game. Like this is gonna always mean something to me because it's the original and probably the same thing for you and so on
Cool.
and so forth.
That's awesome.
Seeing the movie cover, that must be a weird trip too, though. Like to see that like these multi-million-dollar stars are on the cover of your book now.
Right,
Like it's a
right.
weird thought.
It is weird in the best sense of the word weird.
But you're getting a novel, you're getting a paperback re-release, right? With the
Yeah,
movie tie-in
trade
cover and
paperback. Yep.
a new audiobook recording, which
Yep.
makes sense because the audiobook recording was 30 years ago. So that does make sense
Right,
to get a new recording of it as well.
right, right.
Um,
Exactly.
but it's going to be back on the shelves. It's going to be like people are
Yeah,
actually going to be able to get it without having to try to find it. What does that mean? I mean, that must mean great to have it adapted, but this must mean special to you to have it back on the shelves again too.
absolutely, man. I mean, my kids, I have two boys that are in their 20s, and they're both musicians. They both are in punk bands. They're just, heavy, hardcore rockers and everything. But that's their favorite book that of mine that I've ever written. They read
Mm.
it and they loved it and they talk about it to this day. So it's so cool to see that have another life, and it's the ship that raises all other ships. I've got a lot of other stuff cooking, and you know it's it I I guess the message that I've been giving other people now is just don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up. You never know.
Yeah.
It's a crazy business. It's a crazy culture. Things go out of style, then they come back into style, and then they go, who would have thought like Patricia Highsmith when you
Mm.
said, novelists who get
Yeah.
movies made from their books that then become even bigger and have
Yeah.
more ideas and blossom. She's like a perfect example of that when Hitchcock fell in love with her work and started making films like, Strangers on a Train, she got huge
Hmm.
and could call her own shots, and moved to Italy and just started writing these great Ripley books.
Hmm.
But who would have thought that the original Ripley book would become like, it's probably the hottest series in the last
Yeah.
year. I would think, it's
Hmm.
probably going to be the most award-winning series. And I thought it was brilliant. I was riveted to it. And I've read the book like twice, and I've seen the other movie like twice. But I was blown away by how good it was, you know.
Yeah, getting a whole new life, but also like this is we talked at the beginning too about the idea of having a multimedia, different like, things to read things and or to intake things, and one of those people is like I was at my camp this weekend, and my sister-in-law's boyfriend, we were talking about books and reading, and I am crazy, but we're what, August, middle of August now. I've read over 100 books this year, which again I do a little bit hybrid, so I do
Oh,
audiobook, physical book, so there is an
yeah,
easier
right,
to
right.
doing the dishes. I can listen to an
Yeah,
audiobook where I
right.
can't physically read a book. um but that he was like, I just don't read books, but there's a possibility that someone falls in love with the Killer's Game on screen. They go see it in the theaters. This is amazing. Oh, this is based on the book. Maybe they'll pick the book up, they'll read the book and go, oh, I'm a Walking Dead fan, I'll read those. Or I know who Stanley
Right.
is, and I want to read something that you work with Stanley and things like that,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
or any of your other books that are out there. And
right.
so it probably is the name. Your name is not infamous, but like your name might get bigger because of that. You might have doors that open for you and so on and so forth. So this is a big deal, and not just the idea that you're now getting another version of a media
Thank
of your
you.
book.
Thank
But I mean, to me, it's like I want people to know who your name is, because I really enjoy your books. I think
thank
you have a talent in writing, and so I think that's again, it's really cool to see that. And I think that having it come out, even if the Killer Game never got actually on the screen, but it was adapted into like a audio drama
Mhm.
with sound effects and things like that solely, it would have been another medium someone could have intaked
Yeah.
your book. But seeing it on the big screen must be. I mean, I think I'm like, I'm excited for you, like having had you on the podcast and things like that. I'm like, I'm going to get a group of people. We're going to go see the
Oops.
movie the day it comes
You
out.
froze.
Oh, are you there still? I see you fine.
Uh,
I see you shaking that thing. You still
Can
there?
Yeah, I'm still there. You froze for a
Okay.
second.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, but
Are we
now you're
back?
back.
We're
Yep.
back.
Yep.
But
You're looking.
I'm gonna go get a group of people and go see the movie, excited for you. Like I'm like it's
Thank you.
like I don't know, I know it's like one of those things that I'm like, there's no real reason. It's not like my book got adapted into a movie, but I'm gonna bring people to the theaters to see it.
It's you can't, I mean, when you see it, I think you'll know exactly what I mean when I say it's an action film for Walking Dead lovers because it's so gory and bloody, like almost over the top, but that's kind of the point of
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
because my book was, if you have a chance to, if listeners and
Yeah.
people out there have a chance to read or listen to the book. By the way, quick sidebar, people sometimes tell me, I read your book. Oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't read it, I listened to it.
Yeah.
And I go, no, you read it.
Yeah.
You read it. Listening to it is the same thing. And most audiobooks are unabridged today.
Yep.
So, if somebody, listens to it, they'll get the humor. There was dark humor in the original book. I meant, I worked on that. It's not easy to get tone
Hmm.
in prose. It takes a little skill and stuff. And that was only my third book. I was still like learning the craft and stuff. I always am. I still am. But they punched it up
Yeah.
for the movie. They brought in a comedy writer. They punched it up. So it's really funny, but it's still as gory and
Yeah.
exciting, kind of violent as the original book, So like anyway, I don't know.
No,
I'm
it makes sense because I also feel like one of the things I thought about after reading it was that it was ahead of its time in a sense. Like I feel like if people didn't know, if they just picked up the movie tie-in trade paperback from the
yeah.
shelves, read it, then went into theaters and saw it, or the opposite or whatever, I don't think they would have known it was originally made in the 90s. I don't think that it screams 1997 when you read The Killer's Game. Honestly, it screams a movie or idea that came out with in the mid
Yeah.
2015, 2016. Like it screams that to me instead of the opposite. So it's like it doesn't seem like it's taken 30 years for it to finally hit the screen. It seems like, I mean, it seems like to me it would be like, oh yeah, you wrote this book like 2 years ago and it's finally there. I mean, there are some people that get that lucky that it ends up being that fast tracked to screen.
Well, that's
But
true. I mean, some things, it's not that I'm a genius and I came up with something that's ahead of its time. It's just
yes,
like I got. I mean, maybe I've, you and I have known each other for a while. I
yeah,
might have already mentioned this to you, but I got an offer before New Line Cinema picked it up. They were
yep,
the original studio that picked it up from Andrew, but before they picked it up and before Andrew bought the rights to it, I got an offer from I won't mention any
yeah,
names.
yeah,
I'll probably be sued, but I got an offer from a major studio, and they called up my agent and they're like, we'd like to offer you $250,000 for the rights to Jay's book, The Killer's
mm,
Game. And so my agent's like, oh, okay, let me see. Well, first of all, Jay's a screenwriter, so he'd love to be involved in the
yeah.
in screenwriting in the screenplay. And they go, oh, it's already written. And my agent's like, what? Yeah, it's already written. In fact, we're going to cannibalize 3 scenes from it. Okay. And then my agent's like, $250,000 for 3 scenes?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm still it. I'm listening. I'm still
Yes.
interested. And so he goes, will Jay receive any credit? And they're like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
No one can know about this. And you have to take the book off the market and you can never sell it. Wow. Then it became really,
Yes. Yeah.
I was, in my 20s.
Yeah.
I was hungry. I needed money, like I
Yeah.
always do. But I just thought, no,
Yeah.
there's something here. I
Mhm.
got something here. No. And so we finally said no. They stole one of them anyway.
Well,
Again,
it seems like a very common practice out there right now too. I mean, we see that a lot in the world where people are like, "Wow, that
in
seems
my
like a
book,
lot like what I wanted to do."
like I mentioned, it's set in Chicago, and there's a scene on the elevated train, which is part of
Yeah,
Chicago's, culture, and they just moved it to a different place,
yeah,
you know, same scene,
that's
and I didn't make a
yeah.
penny off of it, but I made the right decision.
Yeah, yeah, obviously, and nowadays, yeah, it's one of those
Yeah.
things. I had a friend again. I don't want to name names and things like that, but I had a friend who pitched the idea of a certain thing that you choose your own adventure, which choose your own adventure is actually a trademarked and copywritten
Oh,
name.
right,
So
right.
you can't say choose your own adventure. You have to say like pick your own destiny or some sort of other thing to say it. But he has a
Right.
graphic novel out that you can pick where you go. Is go to page 26 or da, da, da. And he had pitched the idea to a streaming network, and they said no, we're going to pass, whatever. He moved on. Well, like not far after that, they had a reality TV show
Oh,
that did the
I
same
knew
thing.
you were going to say that.
Eat this or don't eat this kind of thing, and you had to pick on the screen whether or not he ate it or not, and that ended up being something on there. And I'm like, all it was is like obviously it had nothing to do with the original project, but maybe it's possible that the idea of a choose your own adventure style interactive thing got in their head like, oh, we could do that, we'll just do it with something else. And so it's
Yeah.
not uncommon for that
Or
to
it's not impossible that they already had that in development.
yes, people think the same things. Yes.
Yeah, Keith Richards once said, there's no new ideas.
Mm.
They're just all out there floating, like spores, and you just have to be open,
Yep.
to it. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it takes a lot of drugs. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible too. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad in the sense that I got to read The Killer's Gives, you passing on that offer at the beginning. With this movie, did you get the ability to like go along for the ride with this movie? Like, did you ever get to visit the set and all that stuff too, or was it basically just okay, they have my book, I'll see it when it gets done?
Well, no, physically, I didn't make it to
Okay.
Budapest, but it was in Budapest,
Yeah.
Hungary. Um, Oddly, my son was on tour and he played in a bar in Budapest when they were shooting it, which is like a weird
Yeah.
coincidence. But I was really treated well by Andrew and Rand, the screenwriter, Rand
Mhm.
Rav. She's like a great screenwriter, and he's a director. In his own right, he's a great director too. But Rand and I really traded ideas a lot, and he was always really respectful. But he gave me he Rand gave me the gift that maybe made the difference in the book. Um, and he just, he called me up one day and he goes, look, I know it's your book. Because like I said, I sold it on the pitch. So I was
Mhm.
working on it while this movie was in development, in the early stages of development. Um, and so he calls me up one day and he goes, and I won't, I mean, because it's a movie now, I
Yes.
won't
Yeah.
the spoiler, but he gives me this great idea. And I'm like, man, that's like a third act,
Yeah.
big third act twist. I'm going to use that,
Yeah.
and it just elevated the book. And I mean, I gave him credit in this afterword that I wrote in the new edition of the
Mhm.
book. So, but yeah, but like I said, I've never made any distinction
Mhm.
between screenwriting and prose writing. It's the same story structures that you use, the same hero's journey, the
Yeah.
same, three-act paradigm, whatever you prefer, you know, um, and so, it was a great experience. The whole thing was a great experience, except the waiting. It was like, but I was being paid to wait.
The worst part, I mean, I know there was probably some delays because of the pandemic and all that stuff, but the worst part would have been for it to like be like have a scheduled date to be like released and then to have it be like delayed even more because of the
Oh,
pandemic. Like that would have been even worse, probably. Just to
it,
be like, it's supposed to come
yeah,
out September 10th, and you're like, oh, we're gonna come out within 2 years, or it's gonna go direct to video or something like that. Like at least having the ability to be able to wait through the past 4 or 5 years,
yeah.
get to the
And
point
the
where now people can
strike.
go to the
There was
theaters.
there was a strike.
Yes.
It was
Oh, that's right. Yes.
the longest strike in the history of show business. Right as they were in pre-production, they were going to shoot, and the strike happened. I couldn't believe it. I was like, okay, this is a book in itself.
Yeah.
the curse,
Yes.
the
Yes.
curse of the Killer's Game.
Oh,
But
now I feel like you need to do that. Now I think you need to do this book adaptation of your real life journey of this
right,
move, this book, and have it be that like this way more fictionalized than it actually was. Though, like all this people stole it. Someone came to the set and took the actual stuff off the set and like made it so they couldn't make this movie for 30 years. Finally I saw it, and it actually was good. People were like, actually, the movie should be in the adaptation, the movie at the end should be bad though. Like it took 30 years to come out and it was royally sucked. Like that's the better part of it. Like that would be an even better story.
I got a call years ago from my agent, and he's like, "Hey, I got some news about the Killer's Game," and I'm like, "Really? The Killer's Game's going before the cameras?" He goes, "No, no, 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 no. No, there's just an article online about the top 10 longest periods of development hell. And the Killer's Game's in that 10. I'm like, really? That's the good news?
It's being mentioned. All news is good news right now. I mean, at least it's being made because some of those 10 are probably still in
Right.
development hell. So it's one of those
Yeah.
things that, and I think that's a misconception to a lot of it. I do get this, we're at over 180 episodes. So I talked to a lot of people and a lot of comic book or writers or artists or authors have waited a long time and not as long as 30 years, but have waited a long time for their thing to get picked up and
Yeah.
actually
Right.
for us to put it in front of our
Right.
eyes. And some people have more direct routes to it, like with Mark Miller has a really
Right.
direct route because a lot of his stuff is owned by Netflix as it is. So like
Right.
when
Right.
he
Right.
writes a comic book, it's already being in
Right.
pre-production for a movie. But to see that journey to go through and see that stuff that actually happen and it takes a while. I don't like 30 years is a long time, but I just letting anybody know out there. It's like when my coworkers at work, because we did a beer I work at Orono Brewing Company. I'm a graphic designer and creative director by
Oh,
day. And
cool.
so we partnered with Daniel Kraus to do a beer for Whalefall when he came out with Whalefall last year. And right after we released the beer and after the book was released, like what, 2 or 3 weeks later, it got announced that the film rights had been purchased and so on and so forth. And people at my work were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see this film." Like, yeah, we'll do a 10th anniversary beer for this for this film because in 10 years when the movie's actually made, we'll go see the theater.
That's
They're all, in
awesome.
their mind, they were all like, "Let's go see the movie next week." And I'm like, it's gonna be a while before this movie is actually like they
That's
bought the rights to
awesome.
retain the rights to have the ability to make this movie. It does not mean they'll ever will make this movie. It's just they now own the rights to make it if they want to. And so
Have you
it
ever
takes a
read
while.
have you ever read the Living
The Living Dead.
The Living Dead?
Yeah.
Daniel Kraus,
Yeah.
George Romero
Yeah.
book. I love that book, man.
It's it's
It's
phenomenal.
epic. It's epic.
Yes.
I
I'm trying
love
to think of
Daniel.
yeah.
Daniel and I are from the same town.
Mhm.
He lives in Evanston, Illinois. I
Yeah.
lived there for a long time.
I
But yeah,
can say it
I
now
love
because I
this
know this
book.
episode we're actually I'm recording backwards, but Daniel's episode comes out before this episode technically
Oh, cool.
is that we're actually doing another beer with him for the Pay the Piper book that he did with George A. Romero that comes out also in September.
That's
And so
awesome.
we I reached out to him again and I was like, hey, it'd be pretty cool. I would love to have my work attached to and my ability attached to George A. Romero as well as you. And so we're doing that again. So we're going to announce that by the time this episode drops. But yeah, we're doing another beer with him, which is really exciting. In the future, I went to my local bookstore, the Briar Patch, and I was talking to Jabron, the owner, and I'm like, at some point, I'll do book beer collaborations again with someone other than Daniel because at this point it's just weird because there's no real connection other than the fact that I had Daniel on the podcast a couple of years ago and he had reached out afterwards saying that he has a book coming out that deals with whales and that
Right.
Maine, I mean, from Maine. And so Maine has a whale population and we have a big
Yeah.
whale thing. And he says it makes sense for a brewery in Maine to do a whale themed beer. And so I was like, oh,
Right.
that makes sense. So then we brought Daniel out and Daniel did a signing and a bunch of stuff out here and so on. But like then I saw him doing this pay the piper thing. I'm like, oh, we'll do that. That'd be cool too. But I'm like, at some point, it's not going to make any sense anymore. Like, like
Right.
Daniel just has this weird connection to Maine Brewery that's making these beers for him. So I think the next one we'll have to pick a different author. We'll have to put our feelers out there for books that are coming out that make sense to have a beer to go with it. But yeah, it's fun. It was a fun and yeah, with Whalefall, it's gonna be a while before that movie comes out. And it takes time. It's not simply just it's not good enough or whatever there's a lot of business that goes into it, obviously, as you know. But once it is okay, we're actually going to do this. This is actually happening. There's casting. There's
Right.
set. Trying to see where the sets are going to be in location scouting. It takes a long time to make a movie, not just business
Right.
wise. It does physically take a long time to make a movie too.
What kind of beer is it? Is
It's
Daniel's
It's an IPA. So it's an IPA
uh,
that we made with this thing called Phantasm. So if anybody knows anything about making beers, whatever, but there's hops that go in beer, right?
mhm.
There's a certain type of hops. There's also certain uh there's certain flavors of hops. There's certain types of those flavors. So there's like cryo hops, which are like cryo frozen, and then there's powders and there's liquids and there's this thing called Phantasm, and it's a special blend that this company makes out of Yakima Chief, I believe it's called. makes him. So we put it into whale fall. It was a special thing. It had to give it a special
Perfect.
body to it, a color
Right.
to it, a special
Yeah.
flavor to it. And so with the only beer we've ever made with this special blend of hops in it was that
Oh,
one
that's
beer.
so
There's a
cool.
new blend of that hop that Phantasm with a different type of hop, and that's the one that's going to be in this Pay the Piper beer. So it's like the two beers we've ever made with this special blend are going to be the two Daniel Kraus beers and just different versions of it. So it's a similar beer to the other
Perfect.
one, but it's pretty cool. So yeah, it's pretty
We're
cool.
gonna
I don't. Daniel's probably never going to come back to Maine. After his trip here, but no, he's not coming up this time. But it's nice to do this via. It's being what's today,
yeah.
Monday. It's being put into cans on Thursday. I'm going to overnight him a couple of 4 packs because we're going to record next Monday, and hopefully he'll be able to
Cool.
have the beer in his hand
Oh,
with the new beer.
that'll be fun. I'll definitely tune in.
Yeah.
You could do a beer for the Killers game and make it a red for blood.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I think someone else mentioned because I had Adam Caesar on, and we were talking about his new Clown in the Cornfield book that comes out in September, and it actually comes out next week in August, and I was like, oh, that would be kind of cool to do a clown theme one. We have Stephen King's from Maine, so you have the It and all that
Yeah,
stuff. But
yeah,
then
yeah.
I realized that I remembered that Clown in the Cornfield is actually a young adult horror, and I'm not sure that Harper Teen would be very very keen on the idea of having a beer attached to a Harper
Beer.
Teen book. I'm like, that doesn't seem like it's going to work very well. But I mean, the Killers game, it's too late now because I mean, obviously we try to market it around it. But yeah, we can be in touch if there's ever a way that it makes it connect to a Jay
Right, right.
Bonansinga book. But yeah,
Yeah.
oh, I
Well,
mean, if you can get me in touch with Robert Kirkman, we could do a Walking Dead book. I would be.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
But no,
Well,
it's
Nick,
a fun thing. We had an article in the paper about it being like a literary. It's a new way because like I guarantee you, and this is not just me tooting my own horn, but guarantee you that at least 10, 15, 20 books of Whaleful were purchased because of the fact that we did this beer. Like that seems
yeah,
like a low number, but I'm just saying like it's probably way more than that. But the idea that I know of in my head, I can count 10, 15 books that someone went out and purchased the book not knowing who Daniel was, not knowing doesn't read
right,
regularly
right,
because they're like, oh, this is another avenue of advertisement in a sense, another
right.
promotional avenue, and which is pretty cool. So the small amount of work that it actually got put into doing it. Like we were gonna
Thanks
make a
a
beer
lot.
anyway.
Yeah.
That tank would have been filled with liquid at some point,
Right,
and
right,
and
right.
it would have had a label on it at some point. So
Yeah,
it took
yeah.
very little effort to do that. And I think, I guess that Daniel probably got an extra 20 books sold because of it, if not more.
Exciting. That's
I would think there
exciting.
was more. I just like to say 10, 20 because I don't want to say there was thousands of books sold. I don't want to toot my horn that much. But
There,
yeah,
there,
so
there were all different kinds of Walking Dead beers. Now that I think about it,
mhm,
I received some in the mail.
mhm.
Um, they would give them out at Christmas
Yeah.
time to everybody on the crew and everything. So there were some cool ones, but you know, it's vertical integration. They
Hmm.
used to call it vertical integration. It's a
Yep.
good idea. It's a great idea, and I love Daniel. I want him to be like gigantic success.
Well, he's got like 3 books on the horizon now that have been announced. I mean, he's got a 2 book deal now with
He's like
Saga,
super
and like
prolific.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
every fall now is a book coming out for him. It seems like it's been
right,
announced, and we actually talked about him on a previous podcast, and that he's like his next book's like a sci-fi book, and the book is like it's like he's not even like it's not like you'd say he's
yeah,
a horror writer. He's just like he's a writer that writes
right,
something
yeah,
different. He doesn't have
yeah,
books that are like he had mentioned before. The only one that has like that's his own book. He writes a couple of co-authored books that are have sequels, but his own sequel
right.
is the Life and Death of Zebulon Finch. But that's only because the publisher said you cannot make that into one book. I'm sorry, it's not going to be allowed because the book itself would have been like a humongous book. But he's just like, oh, I want to write different genres. I want to write different things, and I'm like, hey, it makes sense. I mean, if you got to
That's
be
it.
excited
Yeah,
to write, and if you're not excited to write the
yeah,
same thing over and over
right,
again, then it's
right.
not going to come out good.
I mean, that's why Richard Bachman
Yeah,
exists because because Stephen King wanted to write thrillers and crime and because he's a great writer.
yeah.
And I'm all in favor of it.
And that's to me. I mean, I found out about you via the Walking Dead books, and that's probably. I mean, you probably would admit it. There's a lot of people who found out about your writing
Yeah,
from that. I mean, that's a
absolutely.
name that probably having Kirkman's name on it, but also having the words "The Walking Dead" on it, and
Yeah,
legally be able to call it "The Walking Dead" and have it attached to the thing, probably did it. And hopefully the same thing happens with having this movie come out. Is the fact that some people
thank
would be
you.
like, wait, it's based on a book. This is pretty awesome. I should read this. And I highly recommend the book. I mean, forget the movie never came on. I love the idea of reading the book because the book was phenomenal and it's unique. In this sense, it's not a unique story as in the hitman's in it. The hitman story has been told thousands of times, but like the
Right.
idea that you have a terminal illness and someone you like, oh, I'll put a hit on myself. That'd be the way to go out, get rid of the money they have and so on. And have them be called the next day. It reminds me of there's an episode of Seinfeld where the yogurt for Rudy Giuliani's
Yeah.
yogurt got mixed up with the lab and they got crossed in it. They like, oh, it's his blood levels were through the roof or whatever, and come to find out it was just a mix up. Giuliani didn't go out and start like, put a hit out on himself, but like, it seems like an exaggerated version of that.
Yeah, you're right.
And I love Seinfeld, so that doesn't piss me off. But
When
no,
I was a kid, I loved the movie It's a Mad, Mad, Mad,
yeah,
Mad
yeah,
World.
yeah,
And I kind of, I think maybe even unconsciously, I had that in the back of my mind when I was starting to figure out the killer's game.
yeah.
I'm like, it becomes like this, international chase and all these crazy, personalities who are all, different kinds of assassins chase him. Yeah, it could be Dick Shawn and
I
Carl
just think
Reiner.
about how small of a world I live in, or how safe in a world I kind of technically live in. That like the worst fear is like sending a text message or an email and wanting to retract that email because I accidentally sent that. Let alone say, "Hey, all assassins in the world, the hitmen in the world, just like kill me," and then be like, "Oh shit, I shouldn't have done that because I can live and I can be alive." And also having the mental capacity to go back from that, like in your book, if you talk about Joe Flood, if when he puts that hit out on himself, I guarantee you in his mind, he's in his mind, he's going, okay, I'm going to die. Like he's already decided that like his life is over. It's
Right,
not going
right,
on anymore. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And then have to be like, oh crap, I'm not going to die. Not you've been giving 6 months to live and you end up living a year. That's like, it's
right,
different.
right, right.
This is like any minute now I'm going to die. And I've decided that that's the way it's going to be. And then all of a sudden I know you're like, no, never mind, never mind. I'm just kidding. It could be a
I
mental
had
screw up.
that whole moment you're talking about. I
Yeah,
had it in my mind before I even got near to writing it. It
yeah,
was weeks and weeks and weeks, months before I wrote it. But I knew that I was going to have, him learn, the big twist, the
mhm,
truth, of, the false diagnosis, and he's going to be drunk, because
yeah,
he threw all his weapons in the
yeah,
lake, and he just gets drunk and waits it out and wonders who it's going to be. And I before I even wrote the
yeah.
scene, I thought, what a cool scene if he's going, this is a message from God, man. Drunk, and he's going, this is a message from God. God's telling me, Joe, you don't deserve to die. You're not evil.
Mhm.
You deserve to live. This is a message from God, and and then I wanted to write this line, before I ever wrote the book, I wanted to write, but he would have to think about that later because he
Yes.
heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway outside his door. I wanted to write that line and then have it be the end of the first act.
Yeah,
Like you turn the page, part two,
yeah,
part two. I wanted to do that,
yeah.
and I ended up doing it. It's in there.
That's phenomenal. It's like I said, I'm a big fan of the book itself. I've been a big fan of all your stuff I mentioned
Thank you,
before,
man.
which is other
Thank
stuff that
you.
I've read. I've read your collaboration with Stan Lee, and then the Walking Dead books, and then obviously
Thank you.
this, and you have other stuff out there that people should probably read as well. But I'm thinking right now like this movie tie-in trade paperback comes out a couple days. Is it Tuesday prior to the movie? I believe it is, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be about, yeah, about a month.
Yeah,
Yeah, it comes out next week.
yeah. And so there's that. It's coming out ahead of time, and then there's obviously the audiobook. So if someone wants to actually get in there and read, and read it prior, that's great. Going into the movie blind is also one of those things. Like there's both ways to do it. I think that going into the movie blind, not knowing anything, is a fun way to experience it, and then go, huh, I wonder how close it is to the original material. That's also fun.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
And I think
Yeah,
both
that's
sides. I don't think there's a wrong way of doing it. I think because if you read the book first, going into it, you're like, well, I kind of know what happens. Like if it's an
right.
adaptation of a novel, you're like, okay. In all likelihood, the ending is very similar to the ending. I don't want to know what happens exactly, so I can
Yeah,
see not
right.
reading it. But I also can understand the idea you want to compare the two, or get a leg up on going to see it and tell you what. But
And
I'm thinking,
also the audiobook, like I was really proud of the audiobooks for The Walking Dead.
mm,
We actually won some awards for those audiobooks. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already
yeah,
know, but a lot of people in publishing believe that's where books are
mm,
going to audio. Audio will become kind of like, the chosen format.
mm,
And again, for my 20 something kids, they listen to books. They don't
mm,
read, they listen to them. So I think there is something to that, and it's so I really hope that a lot of people glom onto that audiobook that's have seen the movie. And I think you're right. I think it really doesn't matter whether they
yeah,
listen to the audiobook and then go to the movie, or go to the movie and listen to the audiobook. It doesn't matter. They're two different versions of
yes,
the same story. And also Budapest is like an amazing city. It's just so beautiful. It's just I think it'll blow you away how gorgeous this thing is. It's really a beautiful film, which is an odd word to use for it.
yes. And we mentioned, the audiobook is a great way to take it in, and it's also, um, there's some phenomenal narrators nowadays too. It's just not
Yeah,
just someone sitting in there like, oh, this is
right.
regulated. Like there's people who are like they're so good at doing it. And Will
Yeah,
Dameron
that's
is
this.
reading the book. Obviously, you're
Right,
in there. You're also considered a narrator on it because you read your part of it.
right, right,
But
right.
Will Dameron, who's if anybody has read recently anybody whose books, I read the fully Listen for the Lie recently, which came out this year, and Will was a narrator on that
Yeah,
too, and he's phenomenal.
that was
So
his audition. I
yeah,
heard that and I'm like, yeah, this is the guy.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Those people are going to become superstars in the
Mhm.
future because this is going to be the medium that people
Oh,
uh, you know are
I'm
attracted.
sorry, but I just found out also that I'm excited about is that I was looking because I recommend anybody who wants to buy an audiobook, Libro.fm is a great place to do it. We're not sponsors of the podcast, none of that stuff, but it's just they support local bookstores. So when you buy from them, your local bookstore gets a
Cool.
piece of it. You
Yeah.
also own the DRM free copy. So like you buy it, you can download it, you can put it on your own apps, you can do all your things with it. This is not
Yeah.
one of those things that if Amazon at some point loses the rights to the Killer's game, your then
Right.
audiobook is then gone. It doesn't belong to you anymore because
Right. Right.
you only own it as long as they own it
Yeah.
in
Right.
that sense. So Libro FM is worth it. But I was looking on there, you can click on the narrator and see what other books they're doing. And Will is also doing the John Jackson Miller Batman Resurrection book that comes out as a sequel to the 1989 Batman
I
film.
heard about that.
So he's actually doing the narration of that
That's
book. I
awesome.
don't.
I didn't
So to
know
me, I'm
that.
like, that's phenomenal as well. So,
No kidding, man.
so
That's
after the death of
awesome.
the Joker in, the direct sequel to the movie, the
He
Batman.
has a film noir
Mhm.
sounding voice to me. That's
It makes
that's what
sense.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he's terrific. He's
So I was
terrific.
just now I'm all excited. Now I'm like I was excited in the first place. Now I'm really excited because I'm like I think this guy's worth listening to. So get to check that out too. But yeah, I
That's
mean the Killer's Game is back in print on trade paperback, audiobook. The movie's coming out. I mean, you have a big fall here for you
yeah,
things like that. And obviously you're busy because obviously you're writing other stuff. Obviously some of the stuff you
yeah.
can't announce yet or can't talk about yet because it's in the hopper or whatever. But you've got stuff on the horizon, right?
Right. Yes, yes.
And that's
I
good.
got three different books at different stages. Yeah. I mean, and also you called it. You're spot on. I mean, you try to take advantage of the heat if really, and also everybody in the business goes, hey, if the movie's a hit, you know, you can go out and buy the Tesla,
Yes, yes.
but if it's not a hit, then it's all like up for grabs. You never know. Somebody, if it's not a hit, if it tanks, there's still somebody out there who's like, yeah, I saw his, they made a movie out of his book. Let's look at his next book. So it's all good. I
Well, I think
mean,
yeah, I think for you also, I think in the same sense, it's like you want them to be like that movie was wonderful because obviously it's your original idea and you want it to be wonderful. But it almost somewhat for the person who wrote the novel. Also, when the person when the terminology comes out or the sentence comes out, and people say, "Oh, the book was better." It almost is kind of like a nod to you, being like, "Okay, cool. I outdid the film. My book was better
yeah,
than the movie. You're right because it's the
right.
original writing was in a novel, and so yeah, so you want it to be equal because you want
Yeah.
the movie to be successful. But in the end, if someone does say the book was better than the movie, it's you still win. So like,
So I mean, if that's very true. Well said. Like my sales pitch for the movie is, even if you haven't read the book,
yeah,
I think you'll dig the movie. But if you have read the movie is like reading the book on acid.
there you go. And I don't even have to take acid. I could just go to the
Right.
movies and see it. There you go.
Seriously.
That's awesome. That's there you go. That's the sales right there to it. Go pre-order your
Yeah,
tickets
that's my
now.
pitch.
Seriously.
That's my pitch.
But it's fun. And so, I mean, are you gonna do any like signings around this at all, or are you just gonna like let it be in that the books are? Are you
Yeah,
gonna like
hell yes. Hell yeah, I'm going to do signings. I
nice,
don't have
nice?
the schedule yet, but
Yeah,
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
nice.
Yeah,
It's pretty cool.
yeah, we're going to have some premiere, red
Mhm.
carpet premieres and everything. It's really exciting. I mean, it's a long time a long time
Yeah,
coming.
I can imagine. It's as I said, a lot of people I don't like to point it out, but like you must also be nervous. I mean, as you get this toasted, like I said, now this is going to be seen by so many more people than read the book probably, and now it's like your idea, and someone's going to pick it apart. I don't read those Rotten Tomato reviews and things like
Yeah.
that, like
Yeah, I
because people
mean,
are going to
you're
be
right.
like, this story
It,
sucks. You don't want to hear that.
it is nerve-wracking because even if you see something,
Yeah,
and you're seeing it like on a screener by yourself, or if you're in a screening room with just two other people or something, yeah, I mean, it's a certain, you might love it, you might, be confused, you might, but the emotions that you're having,
yeah,
they totally change when it's in front of a crowd of strangers. It's pretty fascinating, the difference. And so I really can't wait just to watch it with a bunch of strangers in an actual theater,
yes,
because um it takes on a weird life of its own.
that's
Like it just takes on a life. It's this weird, aura of having all
awesome.
these strangers eating popcorn in the dark, watching something together.
And
There's
not
like,
knowing the person who wrote the actual original novel sitting next to them.
right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Why
I
is
mean,
why is this guy crying? Why
yes,
is he
exactly.
laughing? That wasn't funny.
Well, that's the worst part when there is a joke in the thing and it's supposed to be a
Right.
joke and it's from the book. It's almost a line that's directly from the book, and then no one laughs. You're like, oh, is this how it's been for 30 years? People have just not laughed at that line when they're reading it. Like this is not good. But no, it's exciting. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited for 30 years in the making. I mean, I was when you got this adapted or this purchased originally, I was 8. So there's that too. There you go.
Wow.
I'm 38, so I wasn't even like I was not even
Easy,
on the
man.
radar of doing this. But
Wow.
so
Wow.
it's exciting to see that. I love the book. I recommend people
Thank
buy
you.
it, buy the movie
Thank you.
tie-in. I am a big fan of the hardcover original copy, so if you can find it out there, it's
Right.
worth getting
Yeah.
to. But and then also, I'm always going to pitch the Walking Dead series. There's 8 books that are worth reading
Thank
on
you,
both
man.
audiobook and in
I'm
physical
very proud of
novels.
those. And I'm very proud of that. 7 years I was involved with them, and I wrote 8 novels in 7 years, and it was the greatest experience of my career. And yeah, I got treated like a rock star. And Kirkman was, he was fantastic to me.
Mhm.
He taught me really well. And and everybody's like, "Oh, Kirkman's a dick. He's, he's a monster. And I was like, No, 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 he's not." And I even said it to him one time. I'm like, why does everybody have this opinion of you that you're scary and you're, you know, and he looked at me and goes, well, Jay, if I didn't like what you were doing, I'd be scary to you too.
Yeah, yeah. See, and that's the thing. As I say, maybe they shouldn't like what
Like,
you were, the person they were working with. It might be easy to.
okay,
I could be mad at someone or not like someone if they don't like what they're doing, and so yeah,
right.
it makes it pretty easy. But yeah,
But
and then you,
I think working with Romero is maybe what
yes,
got me that job.
yeah,
Because I loved George. I mean,
mm,
when I worked with him, he had we did all our sessions at his house, and with his wife Chris, and they're just these sweet, they're old stoner
yeah,
hippies. They were really fun to be around, and he kind of is a certain kind of genius that I really miss, having him around because
hmm
always like trying to top himself and everything. And if it wasn't for Day of the Dead, I'm pretty sure it's Day of the Dead. There wouldn't be a Walking Dead.
yeah.
Um, George wasn't a fan of The Walking Dead.
No, he was not,
Thought it
but
was a soap opera. And I think that was the genius of
yeah,
Kirkman. Well, it
yeah,
was kind of a soap opera, but
yeah,
that's what, I remember reading the first comic book and seeing, the sheriff finding a horse and trying to get home and thinking about while he was riding home. And this is only like on page 5 of the first edition,
yeah,
the first
yeah,
comic,
yeah.
and, he's thinking about the troubled labor that his wife went through to have his only child, have his son, and he's thinking about this stuff. And when I was reading that, I was like, this is special.
hmm
This something about this. This is, you know, amazing. It's an amazing take on a trope.
Yes, it
Zombies
meets
are
a
a trope.
it meets a broader audience too, and that's one thing I've
Yeah,
always
yeah,
explained to people. And I've actually like my defense to people who don't want to watch the show or read the comics or read the books, whatever. It's always like it's more than just it's world as we know it. If we lived in a zombie
yeah.
apocalypse, this is not
Right,
like
right,
what I think if some people don't watch Romero old movies, it was like he did that too. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is less about the actual zombie apocalypse that's going on the outside than what's
right.
going on in the house and what's in the basement and the racism and other
Yeah,
things that are going
yeah.
on in
Exactly,
that movie.
exactly.
However, it's a lot, and the zombies are what people focus on in those movies and George A.
Yeah,
Romero's stuff. And so with The Walking Dead, it was like, no, I mean, you go episodes where you see like a zombie or two walking around outside, and it's literally just people having conversation and trying to live and
right,
what would you
right.
do in a world that your kids need to eat and so on and so forth, but someone else is trying to get to you, would you kill
Yeah,
that person, would you, and that's more about the stories are about,
yeah.
and that the zombies are just
Well said.
a vessel to, I mean, they
Yeah,
need to have some sort of, if we were just living in a post-apocalyptic world, the only problem out there would be the other people. This added another level to it. You also have zombies that could eat you
right,
and so on and
right,
so
right,
forth. So
right.
yeah, it's a different thing. And I think that's why I've always loved The Walking Dead. And I think that some people hated the more later seasons of the TV show and stuff
Right,
like that.
right, right.
I'm a big proponent, and people probably are annoyed with me saying this on this podcast, but I am just happy that things are being created in the worlds that I love. Forget how
Yeah,
good they are or how bad they are. If you don't like the new Star Wars movies, that's your own prerogative. I'm just happy that we got this new Star Wars movies. Like it's not even like whether they're good or bad. I got to live in the Star Wars universe in the theaters once again, seeing these movies. And
yeah,
so, and they're not, if any, I like them, but if they're not horrible enough that they're not watchable. And so
right,
people just, it's one of those things. It's not the thing that they wanted. And so the future seasons of The Walking Dead didn't follow the comic book as much. They didn't follow stories that had already been created as much. And so to them, it was like, oh, that's not good. It's like, no, that doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it's
right.
different. And I
That's
think
well
that,
said.
and
Well
I think that
said.
I want to read more. So if there's ever more Walking
Yeah.
Dead stuff that you ever want to write, I'm gonna read it. And so that's what I've always said that about
You
it.
are the person that Kirkman values the most because I wrote 4 books with him. He would give me outlines and he would proofread my
Mhm.
books. I would like just
Yes.
build them out and turn them into novels. But then after the 4 books, which was basically the rise and fall of
Yeah.
the governor, he said to me, I think the fans are going to want to know. I think they're going to be really interested in what happened after everybody left
Hmm.
Woodbury? Because they kind of leave Woodbury
Yeah.
in the comic and in the TV show. And so he goes, you're going to write four more for us, but your one charge is base them in Woodbury.
Yeah.
You know, Woodbury will be, the central, pivotal thing in those four novels. And it was all fan driven. That's why he wanted to do that. That's why he spent the money. He had me do it.
Hmm.
You know, and it was lovely. And you just really echoed his whole gestalt.
Yes.
He was a fan. He
Yeah.
started out as a comic book fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
So,
he can buy whatever he wants for comic books, right? Because he's got more money than God. So
and also the Star Wars thing, once in a while, the Mandalorian will come along.
yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like the Mandalorian will come along.
Yeah.
It's like, this feels just like the original. It just has that feel to
Yeah.
it, I think, you know.
If you live in a universe for so long, too, I'm a big Marvel cinematic universe person, and yes, are we struggling as a fandom? In there, are they struggling to find that spark they had with Iron Man and the original
Right. Right.
movies? Yes, they are. But it's when you make 30 something films in the same universe with a bunch of
Right.
different people making it, it does have speed bumps and things like that. It's not going to be perfect all the time, and you are going to have. I mean, I just watched the Deadpool movie. Like I said, it was wonderful, and so like there's glimmers of hope in certain things.
Yeah.
There's some people, like in my opinion, DC hasn't made a good movie in years, so that's a different story. But no, there's this, and the same thing with The Walking Dead. Like there's so much Walking Dead that at some point they're gonna stumble. Something the
Yeah.
same thing with
That's true.
Star Wars. They're
That's a
gonna
good point.
fumble, but the
Good point.
big thing is to step back and sit back and go, what do they people want? What do we want? And so now we have in The Walking Dead, we have Daryl and Carol shows, and we have Negan and Maggie shows, and we have Rick and Michonne shows that are coming out that are like, okay, these are the people want to see. Let's do this. Let's stop with this. What 11 seasons of The Walking Dead turned into, and the same thing with you. We left Woodbury. Let's find out what's going on at Woodbury. This is not
Right.
this town is. If you burned it to the ground and it never existed anymore, it'd be kind of weird to bring it back to life. But when they left, it was still there. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
there's
Right.
this what happened to the people that were
That's
there,
very
not,
astute.
and so,
Yeah.
and the same thing, I'd love to see a
Uh,
prequel of Negan. I mean, the Rick's people weren't the first people they attacked. So it would be nice to
Right.
see what happened with Negan prior to Rick's people finding them or
Right.
connecting
Right.
with each
Right.
other, and
Right.
how Negan got to where he was. And there is the comic books, and there's these here's Negan and stories of like, flashbacks and things like that, but like in depth. And so, yeah, but I'm a big fan of Walking Dead in a sense that I would love to see more, but I'm also like happy with what it is. And it's the same thing with your novels. There's never any more. Great. Awesome. They're there. I can go back and read them whenever I want. But if there ever was more, I'd be like, cool, sign me up. I'm pre-ordering now, and so on and so forth. And the same thing goes for your Stanley, The Devil's Quintet. So like people should grab that too. And there's a third one coming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It's a little ways out though, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
that's so sad. I thought I heard that there was a third one coming at
There
some
is
point.
a
I just
third
didn't
one.
know. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just a little ways out. Okay, cool. But yeah, those are worth getting too. So she'll pick those up. But yeah,
Thank
I mean, we
you.
could talk for hours if you wanted to talk about how awesome your stuff is, but I don't know. I mean, your head's starting a little bit too big for the screen. I don't know if it's no. And
No,
I've said it. I said
I
it a
really
million times to
appreciate
people. I
this.
don't talk to people on the podcast that I don't like what they do. It's not someone who's being told
Yeah,
you really got to
that's
talk to
cool.
Jay. You
I
gotta
can
do some.
tell. I can
So
tell. Yeah.
so I'm excited to talk to you. And I was excited to do this today, and I'm glad. Thank you so much for taking time out
Thank
to do
you.
it. I'm
Thank you.
excited for the Killers game in theaters, back in trade paperback as well as an audiobook. It's well worth picking up in any format that you guys want to do
It
that. So
comes out on September 11th, in theaters only, and then in October, a month later, it'll be streaming.
oh, cool.
So
That's awesome.
yeah,
That's super, super cool. I think people should go to the theaters. I don't go often, and I understand why it's taken a dip in where you should go and what you should
right,
do. If you have to pee in the middle of it, it's really hard to be like, I'm going to miss part of the movie. And
right, right,
if it's at
right.
home, you can pause it and things like that. However, there is certain things that I feel like, if you're going to go once every couple of months, there's certain films that might be pretty cool on the big
Yeah,
screen. But what you've said so far, it seems like this film might be pretty cool to see on the big screen with the big speakers.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
It seems like an action-packed movie that
Yeah,
probably is going to be want to be seen in the theater. So I would recommend that
thank
as
you.
well. And so, yeah, Jay, I appreciate so much for you to come on here again and talk about your
Appreciate
stuff.
it.
We're looking forward to more in the future, and best of luck, and get back to work writing some good novels, will you?
I will. Yes, sir. Yeah, boss.
Thank you
I'm
so
on
much,
it.
Jay.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. See ya.